When the power in the hands of a police officer can be abused, misguided decisions can shatter a life. Joe, a man who has spent his career fighting for justice, suddenly becomes a betrayer of the very ideals he once believed in. But one day, everything changes. A wrongful arrest forces him into a confrontation with his conscience, and Joe must face his mistakes, questioning whether he can make amends. This story is not just about forgiveness or redemption. It is a brutal battle between change and destruction. Can Joe find the path to salvation, or will he remain forever trapped in the shadows of his past? Step into this intense, dramatic, and emotional journey, where every decision has the power to alter fate. It was a warm afternoon on the bustling streets of Fairhaven. Life continued as usual, with people coming and going, some smiling, some hurrying, others lost in their own thoughts. Among the crowd, Naomi stood out with her confidence and grace. She walked with strength in a simple yet elegant dress, the silk fabric swaying with each step. The gold necklace around her neck caught the bright sunlight, like a small flame glowing in the midst of the crowd. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of love, a precious gift from her beloved husband, Mike. Naomi walked past a line of police cars parked by the side of the street. Leaning against one of the vehicles, Joe, a seasoned officer, was sipping from a steaming cup of coffee. His face bore an expression of indifference, yet his eyes glinted with a probing gaze. Joe was not the type of person his colleagues respected for his wisdom. Years in the force had fostered in him a sense of complacency and a feeling of power rather than duty. For Joe, the uniform represented not just his duty, but also power, an unspoken license to abuse it whenever he saw fit. Deep-seated prejudices had corroded his mind, making the world, in his eyes, a fragmented place rather than one of unity. Joe's gaze was drawn to Naomi's gold necklace, and more so to her unwavering confidence. Naomi didn't lower her eyes, nor did she hurriedly avoid eye contact, as many others did when passing by a police officer. She walked past him without a second glance, as though Joe's presence held no significance. To Joe, that gesture was like a silent challenge, igniting an undercurrent of irritation within him. "Wait," Joe called out sharply, his voice deep and cold. Naomi stopped and turned around. Her gaze was not one of fear, but rather one of calm decisiveness. Joe moved closer, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Where are you headed, miss?" The question came with a veiled sarcasm, as if he were looking for an excuse to test her, to assert his power. Naomi raised an eyebrow, keeping her voice steady but laced with sharpness. "I'm going home. Is there a problem, officer?" Her brief response only served to irritate Joe further. His eyes dropped to the gold necklace, the gleaming light seeming to mock him in each passing moment. "That's a nice necklace," Joe said, his tone now dripping with sarcasm and malice. "Is it yours? Or did you just find it somewhere?" Naomi stood taller, her eyes now flashing with restrained anger. "Of course it's mine. It's a gift from my husband." Joe smirked, a smile full of skepticism. "I'll need to check it. Is that all right?" The air grew tense, as if even the crowded street was drawn into their silent standoff. Passers-by began to take notice, some casting nervous, curious glances. In that moment, Naomi knew she wasn't just standing before a police officer, but before a system of prejudice that had sunk its roots too deeply. But she also knew she would not back down, not let herself be disrespected because of her skin color or the life she chose to live. Joe crossed his arms, his gaze scanning the necklace once again, as though evaluating its worth. And quote, "It looks quite expensive. Are you sure it and Oppo's S yours? I just got a description of a theft, and you fit it perfectly." And quote, Naomi and Oppo's S face hardened, but her voice remained calm. And quote, "I assure you, I haven't stolen anything. This necklace is mine." And quote. However, Joe didn't seem interested in listening. The deep-rooted prejudices within him turned Naomi's words into meaningless noise. To him, her confidence and elegant appearance didn't match the image he had of what she should be. And quote, "People like you," and quote, he sneered, and quote, "always have clever stories to justify themselves," and quote. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she fought to maintain composure. End quote. People like me? End quote. She asked, her voice low but determined. End quote. What exactly do you mean by that? End quote. Joe stepped closer, his posture threatening. End quote. You know exactly what I mean. Now, I need you to come with me to the station for questioning. We'll sort this out there. End quote. Naomi took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. End quote. I haven't done anything wrong, end quote, she said, her voice firm but not raised. Though her heart was pounding with frustration, she didn't let fear show. End quote. This is a mistake. End quote. Joe smirked, the smile dripping with contempt. End quote. The only mistake here, end quote, he said, end quote, is you thinking you can walk around with stolen jewelry and not get caught. Let's go. End quote. Naomi felt her patience running thin, but she knew that losing her temper would only make things worse. She spoke, trying to keep her tone level. End quote. I urge you to think carefully about what you're doing. This necklace is mine, and I haven't done anything to deserve this treatment. Please, don't make a decision you'll regret. End quote. But Naomi's words barely registered with Joe. In fact, they only seemed to inflate his ego. End quote. Regret? Oh, I don't think so, end quote, he scoffed. End quote. I enjoy putting people like you in their place. It's part of the job, end quote. Naomi's stomach twisted with the sting of his words, but she held her ground, refusing to let herself be defeated. Deep down, she knew this wasn't just a personal confrontation. It was representative of a deeper, systemic issue that she and many others faced every day. Naomi looked Joe in the eye, her voice calm but resolute. End quote. I warn you, end quote, she said, each word deliberate, end quote. You have no idea who I am, and you don't fully understand what you're doing, end quote. Joe laughed, a mocking sound that echoed against the cold walls of the street. End quote. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, end quote. He smirked, arrogance dripping from every gesture. End quote. Now, don't try to stall. End quote. As he reached for the handcuffs, Naomi acted swiftly and discreetly. She slipped her hand into her coat pocket and pressed the speed dial on her phone. Without saying a word or showing panic, she knew her husband, Mike, would understand this signal. He always did. Joe, oblivious to her action, clicked the cuffs around Naomi's wrists, the feeling of triumph further feeding his arrogance. End quote. Let's see how confident you are behind bars, end quote, he mocked. Naomi remained silent as she was led to the police car. Her posture didn't falter. Her gaze remained eerily calm. Sitting in the back of the patrol car, Naomi's mind raced. She knew this wasn't just a personal injustice, but a symbol of what others like her had endured in silence for far too long. At the station, Joe escorted Naomi in, as though he had just apprehended a dangerous criminal. His colleagues watched, confused, but Joe paid no attention. He was lost in the rush of power, seeing the arrest as a proud victory. End quote. You should be grateful I'm not charging you with more, end quote, Joe sneered, leaning against the desk, his eyes fixed on Naomi, as though she were beneath even a sliver of respect. End quote. Your attitude doesn't suit your station. People like you need to learn their place. End quote. Naomi lifted her head, her gaze locking with Joe's without a flicker of hesitation. End quote. You're making a mistake, end quote, she said, her tone even and measured. End quote. But don't worry, you'll understand soon enough. End quote. Joe laughed, a hollow, cold sound. End quote. We'll see about that, end quote, he replied, completely unaware that, somewhere on the road, Mike was speeding toward them at the fastest pace he could manage. Naomi sat in the holding cell, her posture calm and dignified. The steel bars couldn't dull the strength in her eyes. The police station was busy, officers working tirelessly, but Naomi was like a quiet beacon in the midst of the chaos. She knew she wasn't the first to be unjustly treated because of her skin color, but she wasn't going to let this injustice break her spirit. Across the room, Joe was recounting the arrest to a colleague, his expression smug. End quote. She thinks she can talk her way out of this, end quote, he said with a chuckle, shaking his head. End quote. But I put her where people like her belong, end quote. His colleague frowned, clearly uncomfortable with Joe's tone. End quote. What did she do? End quote, he asked, his voice cautious. Joe waved a hand dismissively, his face twisted in disdain. End quote, she was wearing an expensive necklace, probably stolen. When I asked, she got defensive. Classic, end quote, end quote. But did she resist arrest? End quote. The colleague pressed, his tone growing more skeptical. Joe hesitated for a moment, but kept his smirk in place. End quote. No, but she's the type of person who always acts like she's better than us. End quote. The colleague glanced over at the holding cell where Naomi still sat, composed and calm, before turning back to Joe. End quote. Are you sure? End quote. End quote. Of course, I'm sure. End quote. Joe snapped, his voice dripping with defensiveness. End quote. Stop questioning me. End quote. Meanwhile, Naomi knew that her secret call had already set things in motion. Mike, her husband, was not just a man who loved her, but one who was intelligent and decisive. He had heard every word of the exchange between Naomi and Joe, every insult, every baseless accusation from the officer. His jaw tightened with each word, not just from anger, but from deep disappointment. Mike wasn't just coming to protect Naomi. He was coming to uncover the truth and teach people like Joe a lesson that power was not to be abused. And when he stepped into that police station, everyone in the room would feel his presence like an impending storm. When Mike entered the station, it wasn't with the furious rage of someone out of control, but with the chilling calm of a man who knew the full extent of his power. His uniform was sharp, his badge gleaming, and each step he took radiated strength and dignity. The officers around him straightened instinctively, recognizing their captain immediately. Mike didn't speak right away. He surveyed the room, his sharp eyes scanning each person until they landed on Joe, who was still eagerly recounting his story to a colleague. End quote. Joe, end quote. Mike's voice rang out, steady and commanding, like an electric current running through the room. Joe turned, startled to find the captain standing before him.